of the great decisions for 2023. And we thank the Fredericton Library once again for reaching out to resume this in the post-COVID world and to try to do at least the first and last in person. And as I've already got one of my board members saying they want to do it more in person. So we'll see how that goes next year. The only couple of things to tell you that we are going to be planning, so watch our website. We're starting to brainstorm either a day trip or some sort of trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the State Department, that kind of thing, or the U.S. Institute of Peace, where I was a fellow many years ago. And we're going to kick off at our Torch Awards in May, a forum series on mental health in our region. So stay tuned for information on that going forward. But for now, we have Dr. Medhi Noorbaksh. I'm sure many of you know he started this, and he's a professor at Harrisburg University, but an internationally known expert on international affairs, and particularly on his native land of Iran. And so that's the topic for today's discussion, Iran at the Crossroads. So we'll watch the video, we'll come in, and we'll argue like nobody's business. There you go.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Great Decisions 2023, an 8-lecture masterclass brought to you by the Foreign Policy Association. Topic number 7 is the Islamic Republic of Iran, a perennial foreign policy challenge for the U.S. government. The topic is subtitled At a Crossroads because Iran today faces 2, if not 3, distinct futures. This is not the first time that Iran has been in such a position. Back in 1946, shortly after the end of the Second World War, the Iranian crisis was placed on the agenda of the UN Security Council, its first topic of consideration. The Soviet Union was placing enormous pressure on Iran to align with Moscow, and if not, it was encouraging the northern portion of the country to break away and proclaim independence. In 1953, the Iranians had 2 distinct paths to consider. One was democracy, though socialist, under a newly elected prime minister, and the other was to align more closely with the Western nations. In 1979, the gravest of all crossroads decisions was made. Early on in that revolution, it appeared that moderates would prevail, pushing Iran away from the dictatorship of the Shah and towards a Western socialist model. In the end, however, radicals took charge. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born. In 2023, Iran has no fewer than 3 paths moving forward. The first, and perhaps most likely, is that of the status quo, where the Islamic Republic remains, the Ayatollah stays in power, and the country is at odds with most Western powers. It could elevate its status in terms of power by acquiring usable nuclear weapons, or, as many hope, there could be a wholesale reorientation to the West through yet another revolution. Many point to a Shia spring underway in places like Lebanon and Iran as evidence that this new path may be taken. Iran's geostrategic location places it between hostile powers. The Saudi Arabians are on the other side of the Persian Gulf, long borders with Pakistan, Afghanistan to the east, and Iraq to the west. The United States has been deeply engaged in the Persian Gulf and Middle Eastern region since the Second World War. We've engaged our allies and our adversaries, fought a global war on terrorism that centered on this region, 2 wars with Iraq, one very brief and successful in 1991, and the other very long and painful that started in 2003. Israel, access to oil, and nuclear proliferation round out America's concerns and engagement in the Persian Gulf region. With each of these topics, Iran has played prominently. This is a country that is incredibly important to the United States, yet one with which we've had very little dialogue for sustained periods of time. That was not the case before 1979. The Shah was an American ally. His toppling led to the Islamic Republic, the taking of Western hostages, and deep-seated hatred between the two nations. Dialogue simply disappeared for decades on end. We re-engaged the Iranians under the Obama administration through the nuclear arms negotiations that ended with the arrival of Mr. Trump in the White House, the canceling of the deal, and the application of a max pressure campaign on the Iranians. The Biden administration has restarted nuclear arms talks. They've been rather limited in their scope, and there does not appear to be a smooth path forward for them. The key foreign policy questions we should ask relating to Iran: should we re-engage with the country? Is there any opportunity to find common ground? Can the nuclear arms deal be re-established? Will Iran go nuclear with or without a negotiated deal? And finally, is Iran really at another crossroads? Are we simply being optimistic? There are three main considerations for us before we consider U.S. foreign policy options. We'll look at how we lost Iran as an ally, the rise of the Islamic Republic after 2000 in particular, and Iran at a crossroads today. We begin with the old Iran, post-World War II. The United States had several goals as we looked to the Middle East. One of the most important was access to oil, the lifeblood of industrial societies and the Western world. We also wanted to contain the Soviet Union, to keep communism at bay, and finally to counter terrorism. There were several allies in the region that were considered absolutely essential to the successful completion of our mission. One was Turkey, an ally after World War II and a member of NATO beginning in 1952. In 1967, Israel became one of our closest allies, and in between the two, beginning in 1953, especially Iran was central to our foreign policy in the region. All three allies, pillars of U.S. foreign policy. We won Iran, if you will, in 1953. It was the aftermath of a national election when Mohammad Mossadegh was elected, a leftist who threatened to nationalize oil fields. The Western powers and the Seven Sisters, the major oil companies, had dominated oil production from ground to market. Many in the Middle East believed that the people of the countries should benefit from the oil found underneath their soil. Concerned by the possibility of losing its access to Iranian oil, the United Kingdom led an international boycott of oil from Iran. There was much talk of an invasion from either the United States or the United Kingdom. We ultimately decided to use the CIA in order to create a street demonstration that propelled a new ally to power in the form of the Shah. Here we see Mohammad Reza Shah, a pro-Western Iranian leader who sought to industrialize and modernize Iran, at the same time brutally repressing his people. The demonstrations that began in 1978 against the Shah were largely driven by young moderates seeking to be more like Western Europe, socialist, democratic, and more liberal. It was not long, however, before radical religious elements took over the Iranian Revolution, driving home the Islamic Republic and welcoming the return from Paris of the Ayatollah himself, who became the spiritual leader of the new Islamic Republic of Iran. Hatred for Israel, the West, and the United States was endemic in Iran thereafter. Here we see images of Western hostages that were taken, held captive for 444 days, dooming the presidency of Jimmy Carter. The decision to move away from moderation towards radicalism, one of the more important revolutions of the 20th century. The societal hatred is reflected in murals such as this. The Iranians detest the Americans, they do not trust us, and we return the very same feelings towards them. So what has happened in Iran since the revolution? we can chart the power level of Iran dating back some 50 years, a full decade before the Iranian Revolution. I would plot Iran's power level over that time along these lines, dividing the chart into 4 distinct time periods. There was the slow decline of Iran under the Shah, the devastating 8-year war with Iraq, which began in 1980, pushing Iran to its lowest power level. Following that conflict, for about a decade, Iran was boxed in. And then we see the power surge that began around 2001, which is largely attributable, in my opinion, to flawed American policy towards the region. This was the time of the greatest success of U.S. foreign policy. It's genuinely unfortunate that Iran managed to escape the box and rise in power. What exactly caused Iran's power to rise? An improved geostrategic position, a nuclear weapons program that nearly reached the point of viability, and finally splintered opposition powers. The geostrategic location of a country is defined as its location relative to other powers. Is it surrounded by hostile, large, and capable countries, or are they distant from the borders? For Iran, there were nothing but adversaries when the Iran-Iraq War ended. America's military might was all around the country. A NATO ally in Turkey in the upper left-hand corner, significant American naval positions just outside the Persian Gulf, and then American troop positions in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Adding to Iran's geostrategic troubles was an Iraq still led by Saddam Hussein, the same individual who invaded the country a decade earlier. And to the east there was Afghanistan under the Taliban with the influence of Osama bin Laden, an adversary of the Islamic Republic. As you can see, 30 years ago, Iran was completely boxed in, diminished in power. Everything changed after 2001. The United States went to war in Afghanistan in response to the 9/11 terror attacks in New York and Pennsylvania. In so doing, we toppled a government, the Taliban, and chased bin Laden, a terrorist, who were adversaries of Iran. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, another adversary of Iran, weakening the Western Front. As a result of these two interventions, Iran was no longer hemmed in, it was effectively out of the box because of its changed geostrategic position. Conflicts related to the Arab Spring in places like Syria, Egypt, Yemen, among others, further gave Iran opportunities for influencing affairs in neighboring countries. Here we can see a graph of the Arab Spring, the revolt across North Africa, and the Arab world that undermined their solidity and empowered the Iranian government. Next, as a driver of Iran's power rise, is nuclear weapons program. As you can see from this graph, we're not talking about Iraq in the 1980s, which had a single reactor. The Iranian nuclear program is spread out throughout the country. It is hidden and protected in mountain ranges and very difficult to get at. The question is, why does a nation in general, Iran in particular, pursue nuclear weapons capabilities? Historically speaking, there are many reasons, the most obvious of which is sheer power. Having a nuclear device greatly increases a country's military capabilities. Next is military deterrence. This prevents a nation from invading you if you've got the capability of devastating them with a nuclear strike. Keep in mind that George W. Bush talked about an axis of evil in the world. This is shortly after the 9/11 attacks. He listed Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as members of that axis of evil. Countries that could not be reformed from within could only be changed from without, meaning a U.S. invasion. The U.S. invaded Iraq. Iraq, of course, had no nuclear deterrence. It did not invade North Korea, which had nuclear weapons, beginning in 2006. The message to Iran was clear: if you've got nuclear weapons, you may be safer from a US invasion. Nations, such as the United States in 1945, developed nuclear capabilities for offensive purposes to end a world war. There's also the lure of status. Only 9 countries today have nuclear weapons, and that means that if you possess them, you show a scientific prowess that few others possess. And finally, one could pursue nuclear weapons as bargaining leverage, to have something to bring to the table in order to negotiate a better relationship moving forward. In 2012, more than a decade ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went before the General Assembly and said that Iran was within 90 to 180 days of breakout, meaning it was very close to possessing nuclear weapons, that economic sanctions had fundamentally failed, and a more robust policy needed to be taken to address the issue of Iran's nuclear weapons program. The problem back then and today is there are very few good options for dealing with an Iranian nuclear weapons program. We can economically sanction the country, and we've done so for more than a generation. This graph shows us the effectiveness or lack thereof of economic sanctions in dealing with Iran's nuclear program. The red bar represents nuclear weapons capability, and the line that you see there is the progress in that direction. Significant sanctions were applied by the United States beginning in 2000, along with our allies, to prevent Iran from developing nuclear capabilities, yet throughout that decade, the number of Iranian centrifuges and overall progress continued to increase. The deal was struck in 2014, progress was diminished, the deal was withdrawn from by the US, maximum sanctions were applied, and Iran today is closer than ever to nuclear weapons capability. This tells us that sanctions alone simply will not prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. Our second option is to assassinate scientists, which we, along with the Israelis and other allies, have done for the last couple of decades. This indeed does slow down Iran's progress, but it by no means ends it. War is an option that many people support. I guess the first question is, who's going to wage it? Certainly not the Israelis. They don't have a military designed for long-range sustained combat. Iran is simply too far, the battle is too complex, the targets are too greatly protected, and the air defense systems are too much for the Israelis to overcome without significant losses. The thought of an American invasion of Iran, given the troubles we've had in the 2 neighboring countries of Afghanistan and Iraq, have to be very, very slim. It leaves us really only with one option, and that is an agreement with Iran, a nuclear deal to slow, if not end, the program. So what did the Iran nuclear deal look like? 6 major powers joined together: the US, the UK, Germany, and France, along with Russia and China. They confronted at the diplomatic table the Islamic Republic. The end result is called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, an agreement by which Iran would give up much of its nuclear capabilities in exchange for the end of sanctions. As the negotiations got underway, the 7 powers staked out their position. Desiring a very weak accord, not surprisingly, was Iran. France could be found at the other end of the spectrum. Among the 6 major powers, it sought the strongest possible deal, hemming in the Iranians. Russia and China would be placed there, with the final 3 Western powers, including the United States, somewhere between China and France. When the negotiations proved fruitful, a deal was struck. I would place the deal roughly there on the scale. Not quite everything the Americans wanted, but clearly closer to our end of the spectrum than the Iranian one. The deal that was struck was a limited trade-off between Iran and the Western world. it would forego its nuclear facilities, allowing international atomic energy inspections of all of its program. In exchange for that, Western sanctions would be relieved and investment in trade would be allowed. The focus of this joint comprehensive agreement was solely the nuclear weapons program of Iran. It did not address the myriad of challenges that remain on the agenda, from Iran's support of international terrorism to its position on Israel, its influence in Syria and Lebanon, the ongoing war in Yemen, among many other issues of concern. It was generally understood that the only way that Iran would come to the negotiating table is if it felt maximum pressure from all major economies. Before negotiations, the U.S. led Western powers in sanctioning Iran, but China and Russia still invested there. Trade was vibrant between them. A deal was struck among the major powers. If everyone sits down at the table, China and Russia agree to divest from Iran, to join the sanctions regime. Yet once the negotiations were complete and a deal was struck, all sanctions would be lifted against the Iranians, allowing not only Russia and China to invest, but France, the UK, and Germany as well. When the deal was struck, the United States moved a little closer towards normal trade relations. However, it was only because we were lifting our sanctions. When Mr. Trump was elected in 2016, he quickly took the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal, placing us back on the sanctions end of the spectrum. This is where we stand today. It's a policy similar to the one that we pursue with Cuba, in which the U.S. and U.S. alone is sanctioning the targeted country. Even our allies are trading and investing in Iran today. The great powers, in other words, will trade with Iran, with or without the U.S. on board. This greatly reduces our leverage should we return to the table in seeking a new agreement. And finally, explaining the rise of Iranian power since 2000 is the splintered opposition around it. This is a country that really should be boxed in forever. You've got Turkey and the United States as NATO allies, Israel and Arab states hostile to Iran, Afghanistan under the Taliban, China and Russia, which do not want to see further nuclear weapons spread, including to the Islamic Republic. And yet all of these countries have weakened their own position. Israel and Turkey have been in an ugly spitting match for the last decade. The Arab alliance is in name only. There is no such thing. Even the Gulf Cooperation Council spends more time battling itself than it does the Iranians. Afghanistan is a complete disaster. China and Russia have prioritized trade and investment over nuclear weapons negotiations, leaving the United States isolated. We, of course, change our mind on almost every foreign policy issue with each new U.S. president, which means we cannot pursue a consistent policy towards Iran. Iran has become more deeply involved in the war in Ukraine, providing the Russians with drone capability to strike both military and civilian assets in that country. If we find convincing evidence that Iranian drones are being used by the Russians, the United States must respond to this with exceedingly painful actions that will sound the alarm bell in Tehran that there will be a very high price to pay if it supports Russia in its illegal ongoing war in Ukraine. China has taken things one step further, signing a 25-year strategic partnership with Iran covering areas like trade, security, politics, and culture. It reflects Iran's new Eastern-looking policy to counter American max pressure, and of course for China, there's that Iranian oil and natural gas that it desperately needs for its economy. There is talk today about a possible Shia spring, one that parallels the Arab Spring that began in December of 2010, when conflict in tiny Tunisia quickly spread throughout the Arab world. Governments in Tunisia Libya, Egypt, and Yemen all were pummeled by popular protest, and in Syria a civil war started that is now entering its second decade. The shock of the Arab Spring didn't wear off, to the point that by the time we get to 2020, there's very little discussion about it. But now the talk is about a new Shia spring in Shia-dominated countries like Iraq, Lebanon, and in today's case study, Iran. It all began in Iran when a young woman was killed during a protest by the Iranian security forces. Massive protests across the nation ensued, making headlines across the globe. Is Iran really at a crossroad today, or are we simply being overly optimistic? If it were at a crossroad and things broke our way, it would mean regime change, another revolution, and maybe even pointing Iran in the direction of moderation. We've been shocked when countries change course dramatically very quickly. South Africa did so in the 1990s, from white minority rule to democracy and an end to the nuclear weapons program. Many hope the same will happen in Iran someday. The odds, however, are with the status quo. The strength of the Iranian regime and its Republican Guard mean the odds of the moderates taking power are relatively slim. It does mean, however, that Iran is likely to continue to crack down and increase the power of the government. Iran today is authoritarian, which means it controls government and all powerful institutions. It is transitioning, however, to totalitarianism. This is when a government controls all aspects of its citizens' lives. Everything that is done is controlled by the government. And profoundly, of course, anti-Western, anti-Israel, and anti-the United States. If Iran is at a crossroads, these are the two directions that it could take. Why I don't think it's likely that a revolution would succeed in the country is reflected in the difference between 1979 and the current situation. Back then, a very weak and declining Shah of Iran faced a very strong popular movement. Today in Iran, however, the regime is quite capable and the popular movement is modest at best. This is an indication that radical change is likely not underway in Iran in 2023. Foreign policy options. We'll take a look at Iran from the perspective of the four foreign policy approaches I've outlined in this course. Wilsonian international liberalism says we should stay engaged with Iran, seek a deal to curb its military capabilities, especially along nuclear lines, and encourage protesters to stand up for their rights and demand government change. A more conservative realpolitik approach would support the anti-Iranian coalition around the country, building up Saudi Arabia, finding opportunities if they exist in Iraq, and strengthening the anti-Tehran coalition. The neoconservatives call for military intervention. This is a classic example for them of a country that needs its government toppled so that the people can express their willingness to be free and democratic, changing the direction of the country. Similar to our invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq, we would not only invade and topple, but fix the country for the future. America Firsters embrace Israel. They talk more strongly about protecting it from threats such as Iran and focus on energy independence as a way of weakening Iran's influence in global oil markets. Four perspectives and four very different foreign policy prescriptions. Thank you as always for joining us. Stay engaged and make great decisions.
Well, stay engaged and make great decisions. We've got a lot to talk about with this topic. I'll tell you, I don't know how, maybe it's 15 years ago, I was covering Khatami in Iran. And I came back after having talked with students who were protesting and who thought that this was going to be the new day in Iran. And I think the title of my series was Iran at the Crossroads. So Iran stays at the crossroads, right? I mean, I'm curious though to hear. I mean, a lot's going on now. I do think Iran has changed somewhat because of the women's uprising. And as I was telling Dr. Noorbaksh, with our International Women's Conference that we held at the Civic Club last Saturday, we started by giving a moment of silence for the women of Iran. When you die because you take off your headscarf, when 15-year-olds are dying because they don't want to, simply wear the hijab. I mean, that is where the world is taking notice. So, Dr. Medhi, tell us what you think.
I was really surprised of some of the
Oh, I forgot
analysis.
there was a microphone. Yeah, we got to turn it on. All right, here you go.
I was a little bit surprised. Mossadegh. Mossadegh was not a
We didn't even
socialist.
mention.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Great Decisions 2023,
Sorry about
an
that.
8-lecture masterclass brought to you by the Foreign Policy Association.
Yeah, sorry
I
about that.
wanted to listen to it.
Oh, yeah.
It surprised me. It really surprised me because the analysis was not really a deep analysis of Iran. You know that Mossadegh was not a socialist, and unfortunately, under the pretext of that misunderstanding, in 1953, the British sold to the United States Eisenhower at that time that, this guy is a socialist, close to communism, and we better, carry out a coup. And they carried out a coup. Truman was very different in terms of the understanding of Iran and Mossadegh. Under Truman, Mossadegh came to the United States. He was well received. And Truman administration thought that it's a right of the Iranian to nationalize the Iranian oil because the British at that time dominated that industry, and they were not opening their books to the Iranians to see how much they sold, how much was the profit, because in the Middle East at that time, the British and others, they were going for 50-50. 50% of the profit, of course, was shared. Mossadegh was not only about oil nationalization, and one of the arguments at that time between Mossadegh and Shah was the concept of democracy. Mossadegh, as a French educated, came back to Iran. He's coming from the Qajar family, in the nobility, raised of course in the nobility, but he was always for the service of course of his country. And one of the contentions or discussions with the Shah was the perception that he had from the British and European monarchs that they reign and they do not govern. And Shah did not accept this idea. Shah wanted to run the country. And the coup was carried out. Oh, and at that time, that was a source of misperception that the British knew what is of course going on. Mossadegh as a liberal, as a Democrat, allowed the communists, also the same as other people, to have political party, to participate in politics, and they did. And they were very organized. That organization didn't mean that others were not organized. At that time, we had, of course, nationalists very organized. And that was the misperception that I was very, very much shocked that after 1953, 70 years, it's still in Washington, the think tank, things were all that way. In terms of
But I think let's stop there because I think it's important that we know that the Iranians, just to put it bluntly, believe the United States assassinated Mossadegh. And that
they
he
captured
was on the road to
yeah.
democracy. And that's where he didn't even mention even
See, that is the point. I'm not justifying anything, of course. The Iranian government is a crazy government. There's no question. And Joyce knows I cannot go back to my country because I'm in opposition. I'm writing. But Mossadegh was a Democrat, and unfortunately that coup killed the embryonic democracy in a country. You know that Iranian are the first country in the Middle East that they go through what they call the Constitutional Revolution, 1905 through 1911. And they wanted to contain, of course, the dictatorship. And of course, Reza Shah came to power, the father of the Shah, through a coup, and ignored totally what the Constitutional Revolution was all about. And in 1953, they finished the whole deal. And dictatorship, authoritarianism, of course, came back to Iran. And the United States stood behind the Shah to 1979. And those nationalists who in 1953, and one of them, of course, was my father-in-law, and Joyce knows, that after the Iranian Revolution, he became the foreign minister of Iran. He came back. He was a university activist. They are coming from a background, they call them religious nationalists. Religious nationalism means religion as a personal thing, and nationalism, of course, standing for your country and democracy and all of those things. And a lot of those people who were bruised in 1953, they came back in 1979. And they carried out that revolution for democracy, not to give it to Khomeini. That is another story. I don't want to go back to that story, what took place after the Iranian Revolution. You know that we have a lot of revolutions in the world. If you look at the French Revolution, if you look at it to some extent, the British, and of course the English Revolution, and even in the United States, you have the Civil War 100 years after the American Revolution. Yes? They didn't know that, the Southerners come back, and under democracy, they want to have a slave. It didn't make any sense. And one of the heroes in my life, I have a couple of heroes. I have 3 heroes in my life. One of them is Lincoln. The other one is Mandela, and the third one is Gandhi. I don't have anybody else. I have, these 3 people. These are amazing people. And, in parentheses, Lincoln at the beginning was not against slavery. He was recommending, and he was very much encouraging the blacks to go through Latin America and just, just go over there. But came to the conclusion very soon, he was pragmatic and became idealist, that in a democracy, you cannot have a slavery. And there was, of course, a pragmatic type of decisions also. The British were very close to recognize South of the United States as a country. You're talking about the slave-holding states in the United States. And for the sake of unity and his idealism, of course, he became, of course, Lincoln. And that was a moral decision. That was a practical decision. That was, of course, innocent. He's going back to the, of course, the United States invaded for a wrong reason Iraq. And Iranian, of course, took advantage of it. And the United States, of course, for a right reason, went to Afghanistan. But the wrong invasion in Iraq, they did not have to go to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, in 1992, there was a socialist regime in Afghanistan, Najibullah. And the Afghanis, they could strike a deal with Najib, because Najib was not a communist. At that time, the Reagan and the Bush administration, they were hating socialism. And in the United States, you know that, when you sometimes think about, socialism and communism, socialism is communism, and that is a wrong perception. Because communism is a political system, and socialism is what? An economic system. And when you say socialists are all communists, that is a wrong thing. And that is a reason why in most of the European countries at the moment, you have a social democracy. It means, aspects of the economy is socialized, healthcare and education in most of European countries. And they have democracy and they have free market too. In the United States, we have socialism too. I'm taking advantage of my socialism. Medicare.
But I want to redirect you to Iran and what's going on.
I go back.
But right now, do we see Iran as really being on the brink? I mean, are the women who are protesting going to bring down the Islamic regime? That's one of the, and then I'll let you guys ask your question. Is that going to happen or is that not going to happen?
Before that, let me go through 5 areas that the Iranian regime is very much challenged. And I'm writing one article. There is one article that's coming out very quickly, very soon in Washington. I think, either Middle East policy or Washington Quarter. I send it, you put it, of course, on the rise of despotism in Iran. That is about the vulnerabilities of Iran at the moment. One, of course, is in the area of economy. Economy, we are talking about inflation, unemployment, sanctions, and all of those issues. And the economy is in a terrible shape at the moment in Iran. Inflation is around 50%, unemployment is around 30%, especially in the younger generation. The dollar, the value of the Iranian currency declined so rapidly during the years, and especially under this government. Anyway, I don't want to go through.
Is that the result of American sanctions or
sanction and mismanagement? I go through it. Both of them.
Okay.
The other one, of course, leadership and elite and mismanagement. That these guys are sent. A bunch of clerks without knowing that governing is an art, is a science. These guys, they do not have any clue. It's a type of regime that you heard about it, patrimonial. Patrimonial regimes are traditional regimes that everything, of course, the power stays on the top of the pyramid of power, and that is overall what you see. Number, of course, 3, foreign policy, that Iran is in a terrible shape. But this, of course, video today did not include new development, and especially the development in that second article. I think that second article, I'm against a lot of people in Washington who do not know what is going on in the Middle East at the moment in case of Iran and the Middle East. Iran is not the Iran of 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. Iran lost a lot of influence in the Middle East. If you look at, for example, the Iraq case, if you look at, for example, the Syrian case, in Yemen at the moment there is a peace framework by the United Nations. The United States is supporting it. Iranians, they do not have any other choice. Saudi Arabia accepted it, and they are going through a resolution. In Iraq, the Iraqis totally currently maintain an independent from Iran and other units. In Syria, Israelis, of course, they have the power to come and bomb Iranians facilities inside Syria, and they are collaborating with, of course, Russia, and part of course, Syria is under the control of Turkey.
Right.
And the United States is working with the Kurds, and Iran does not have the influence that was expected.
So it's lost influence.
Lost influence.
And
In Lebanon, the same.
It's got a bad economy.
Bad economy,
And it's
lost
got women
influence.
protesting in the streets.
Yeah.
Is that enough to bring down?
No. Let me go, and there is, something else. There is identity crisis in Iran, and the legitimacy, the question of legitimacy. 60% of the Iranians are under 30 years old.
Yeah.
And they have not seen the Iranian revolution at all, but they saw the miseries of the post-Iranian, of course, regime organization. I talked about it. In the last couple of months, Iranian came to the conclusion that they cannot live that way in the Middle East. And the Chinese, they do not want a nuclear Iran. The Russians, they do not want a nuclear Iran. The Europeans and the United States, of course, they share that interest. And number 2, all of them want a very stable, secure Middle East. And I don't know if you know it or not, in February 21st, the Chinese struck a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this is the first time after 7 years that Iran and Saudi Arabia, they had really a very bad relations. And Chinese are in the middle at the moment to see that Iran is behaving. And because Iran...
China's making back.
Yeah, no.
Right.
China, for the reason that China wants stability and security in the Middle East. They don't want Iran to interfere in the affairs of other countries. Iran lost influence that that is
right.
talking about. Iran is not capable to make a nuclear bomb for a variety of reasons. Not technical, but politically, if Iran goes close to that breakout, then they lose Chinese, they lose Russians, they lose Saudi Arabia and other countries, and that is something else. And Iranian played that game. And in the Western, of course, world, they reacted. But we are stuck over here at the moment. And this is my argument, that do not take Iranians serious about that issue.
Okay. But we have a weakened Iran. But
we have
you
a
don't
weakened
think it's
Iran.
weak enough to see a regime change?
And this is overall my point and my overall differences with this.
Okay.
In Iran, the population and the politicization of the population is not comparable to any other country in the Middle East. And yes, I'm not saying tomorrow Iranian can change regime, but the politics inside the country, because of all of those elements that I explained to you, remains very unstable. And there are opportunities for the Iranian people, and they are taking advantage of it. One example for you guys, perhaps you want to know this. In Iran, the daughter of the previous president, Hashemi Rafsanjani, is in jail at the moment. And they took Fatemeh. No. What is it? I forgot.
Yeah.
They told him you can go if you commit yourself to not encouraging other people to the country. And he announced, if you make me free, I will go back and encourage people to go back to Israel. This is a tone of the opposition in a country. And that argument, this woman and others, we have it. That argument that Iran can lead to totalitarianism, that is not true. That is not true. That is a totally misunderstanding. Even Putin in Russia could not turn the country. Putin could not turn it into the Soviet era totalitarianism. He's an autocrat. He's of course authoritarian regime. But we cannot talk about those issues, because if you do not understand the people in a country and the fight that they are waging at the moment, the battle that they are waging, then this kind of analysis is a little bit
different. Well, let's take some questions from here, but I guess my concern is that the latest is coming out that they're going to clamp down hard on women now who are girls who are now walking around without the hijab, without the scarf, and they're demanding now that they push to really start killing them, basically.
And hijab choice is part of the other, issue of freedom in Iran.
Yeah.
You remember when Mas was that year, came over here.
Oh, Masa, yeah.
Yeah, Masa.
Yeah.
When she came over here,
she wrote the book.
I told her that hijab is not a second, that is within the frame of freedom. For the Iranian women, freedom, they know if tomorrow they allow everybody, of course, to take away a job, there is that issue of freedom is not solved. And they know it very much, of course, better than anybody else. Anyway, I'm very optimistic about Iran. Yes, I am.
When you say you're optimistic because you do feel that the government is going to weaken. Is that optimism?
That is what it is.
And that it will slowly democratize.
That is what it is. And I'm telling you, not from a position of somebody who's sitting in the United States and doing research. I am in contact with a university student, university professor. There is not a week that I do not have a Skype or Zoom or a type of discussion with 50, 60, 100, 200 students and activists in Iran. And that new media gave me belief in life, because was looking at this, and you cannot believe how educated these kids are.
Yeah.
How educated these kids are.
How connected they were. See,
How
now
connected,
the world is
exactly.
really connected because people can connect via Zoom, right? There's social media, and I'll tell you, the Iranians are really active
Really good.
on social
Really
media.
good. 80% of the Iranian, they have access to internet. In a country that government is totally and constantly trying, of course, to stop it, to curtail it. The literacy rate in Iran is 87 point something, but in the younger generation is 98.9.
Wow. Okay.
Under the Shah, 6% of the population, 7% of the women were going to the university. At the moment, 55 to 45, 55 female and 45 male in the universities. Is a country with a lot of human resources, a lot of course, political activities, and these kids, they are not just stopping at a bachelor degree. These kids want to go out, and they want to go for masters and PhDs and out and
Unfortunately, it doesn't cost them a fortune in Iran.
but at their level, it costs them a fortune.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah,
Russell,
at
you
their
had a
level.
question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Russell.
Mary, you got to convince me a little bit more. What I'm hearing is that the population is extraordinarily well educated, and young people in particular. And I don't think that actually is a surprise. And that population, that demographic, no doubt wants a greater degree of freedom and democracy, etc. But they are up against a regime that has proven that it will slaughter you in the streets. So I'm just curious, what makes you confident or optimistic that things are going to change?
I don't agree with the interpretation of the person who was talking over here that Shah had a weak army. No. The revolution broke the back of the army. They negotiated with the army. And in Iran, that is taking place little by little. Close to about 2 weeks ago, they were part of the Sepah, the guards, that they wanted to attack Khamenei's house. And that plan was exposed. They arrested, of course, a lot of people. It is an authoritarian regime that cannot control every segment of the population. So when I'm talking about segment, I'm not talking about necessarily the middle class and the lower class, and I'm talking about different segment of the population in the military, in the various areas. And I talk to a lot of them. At the moment, I'm in contact with the Iranian soldiers who are in Syria, Joyce, and they are not satisfied. Why they are in Syria? Why they are fighting, Syrians in Syria? For the sake of what? For the sake of all, supporting the.
So there's a lot of disgruntlement.
A lot. And what it has to take place is a social movement. You know what social movement do? Social movement, they have a structure, various group of the society, they come together. Leaders or leaderships, comes out of, those social.
Isn't that what the women are doing? Isn't that
The women are not close to that. Unfortunately, there were a couple of, misgiving, a couple of misunderstanding. This younger generation, they thought they don't need the experience of the older generation. You know what I'm talking about. And I was telling them from the beginning that guys.
So they need more organization.
More organization, more understanding of the history of the country. These guys are operating very differently from my generation. You know what I'm talking about. But for social change, you have to look at the context. You have to look at your heroes. You have to look at that 80 years old that is sitting in the jail at the moment, and see what is the lesson that that person can give you. They have to learn what Sotoudeh has done, that lawyer, has done for Iran. What, the Hashemis, daughter, has done for Iran. They want to bypass those guys, and that was a huge mistake that they did. But they are realizing it. They are coming back.
Are you
And
at
that
all
just-
surprised at the courage, though, that you're seeing on the streets?
No,
You're not.
no, I'm not.
I was. I couldn't believe
No,
it.
I am surprised of the bravery
Yeah.
that they are very brave. Very
Yeah.
brave.
I mean, courageous.
Very courageous. It's just amazing. They are not afraid of anything, and they are playing this game this way, that they don't have anything else to lose. That is all how they do. I was talking to me one of the that is conferences. He said, Dr. Noorbaksh, what else do I have to lose?
Wow. Well,
I
when
don't
somebody
have
gets,
I don't have work. I'm educated. I got my master's in this and that. I cannot have I cannot marry somebody. I cannot have a house. I cannot have a car. I cannot enjoy my life. What else remains of it? Then this is a population that you see in Iran at the moment, totally frustrated and hating the government. That is part of the process. That sometimes when you do not address what people demand, at the beginning you are angry. And if you pass, that is a psychological understanding of the process. If they pass that anger stage and they go to hatred, then you have violence, you have a lot of things, and Iranians at the moment are in that hatred stage.
you had a question, go ahead.
How much does the Iranian government block social media to stop things happening?
Oh, a lot. Today I was, that there is a media at the moment that Iranians are using, and every day we have they call it Clubhouse. I don't know how many of you heard about the Clubhouse. No? Guys, where are you? I'm just joking. I'm just joking. In America, a lot of people are using it in the last couple of months. But in that part of the world, it is used tremendously. Clubhouse is a room that you open it, and you can have up to about 10,000 people in that room. And people are sitting in the audience. You can bring 5, 10 of them, 20 of them on the top, in the top of the room, and they can discuss issues. We have a room 6 days a week. Me and a couple
In
of
Iran?
From Iran.
Okay.
From Iran. The room is established from Iran.
Okay.
And we go through the news of the day and the analysis, and you cannot believe me. Every single day, we have at least 2,000 people in that room. At least 2,000.
See, I don't think they can, that's the point, they can't stop. They
No.
can keep trying to block, but
No.
I know, there's a lot of Iranians out there. on
And
social
Iranians
media.
are very much
Twitter too.
very much IT savvy. They find ways to get back against the government. And yeah, that's something.
The U.S., I don't know how influential it is now, but the U.S. operates a radio and internet service into Iran. That's what I had at one time called Radio Farda. That means tomorrow in Farsi.
Yeah.
What's the influence there now? Do you know, or is it weakened?
Not really tremendous, especially after the Clubhouse.
Yeah.
Because the Iranians are for themselves, these are, and during the day, and they chill me to go to different rooms. And if I want to go to different rooms, they have to spend 8-9 hours in different rooms. Because the rooms are not 2 hours. We had a room this Sunday, and they invited me to go to that room. They were very respectful people. 4,000 people participated in that room. I stayed over there for 3 hours, and the room went for 12 hours.
Wow. That's amazing.
And you see that 4,000, of course, in the morning went to 2,500. But still, 2,500 is sitting in this room and you're listening to the discussion.
That's why there really is a virtual world. There really is.
And choice in the Middle East, there is no other country like Iran that are using, that kind of media at the moment to communicate, to talk. And people from Iran that they come to this room and they come to talk, they are not afraid of them at all.
Are any of the Ayatollah in the room?
Yes.
Really?
That room, Sunday that I told you, we were debating, two clerics, me and 3 others. We were debating them for this regime and overall, how Islam is a government too. And we were telling them, and we were debating them that no, Islam does not have any special politics and especially in the government. And that was a very scholarly debate. It was not, just debate.
Screaming and yelling.
No,
Yeah.
it is not.
Yeah, that's what we do here in this country. But
No.
anyway, any final questions or comments for Dr. Noorbaksh?
Guys, I'm sorry. I didn't want to, disrupt you guys with that, video.
Okay, go ahead, Kate.
That video was not, Kate, that video was not optimistic. And optimistic about Iranian people. And the government is a garbage government, But it was not optimistic about, Iranian and the level of sacrifice.
Well, the reason for that is because a lot of scholars don't know the people.
Yeah.
They haven't been there. They only know, the framework of policy. They don't really know the
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So.
Kate, go ahead, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, my question was simply, the young people, particularly university-age students, are any of them able to go to other countries to study?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because years ago, I know when, in my programs, there were so many Iranian students and wonderful students, I'm the top of the class.
Yeah. The Iran at the moment, on the top of everything else that I explained to you, economy, and that is part of the economy, Iran is on the top of the list of brain drain. And the Iranians...
But do they go back to Iran then?
No.
Afterwards? No, they're...
He didn't go back.
He stayed there.
No. And you know that in Iran, 5 universities in the area of engineering, they are not one of the toppest, they are the top undergrad in the world. Yes, University of Tehran, University of Tabriz, University of Isfahan. And go and look at, Stanford and other good universities and see how many of those students every year they get full scholarship and they come to the United States. Under the Trump administration, we had a lot of problem. And that was one of the things that Trump did, unfortunately, that disconnected that cultural exchange, not only between Iran and the United States, between Iran and the world, because those become your ambassador, yes? And you need that. We don't have in the United States, if you look at, for example, China, these are other discussions that are very much at the moment in crisis with the population. In 2050, China made population increase to half of what it is today. India does not have that population. Japan has, of course, population problem. Most of the European countries, they do not because of the migrants. The United States did not have it because we had people from all around the world who were coming to this country. And those people who do not understand it, the value of this. That this is a culture, this is a democracy, you have the best institutions, and these kids are coming over here, they educate themselves, they stay in this country, they contribute to this country. 1/3 of the vaccines around the world, and that mRNA vaccine now, mRNA was absolutely by the foreign scientists, 1/3 in the world. And this one, the last one, was by a lady from Yugoslavia, came to this country and they worked for a husband and wife in Germany. They were Turks. And they put together, this vaccine. And they sold the patent to Pfizer, and this is what we have at the moment. That's the best,
So you're saying immigrants come
Immigrants
and they
come
contribute
and
to the
they contribute.
sciences and medicine, and yeah.
Because they are in love, you know that if you look at, the immigrants in this country and in the Middle East and in the other part of the world, one of the things overall for them is education, and education is on the top of the list.
Well, we've explored Iran, and you're optimistic
Yes.
that we will see a slow democratization within a year, right?
No. No. Because I want to come back over here next year. Okay.
The truth is, I want to go to Iran and visit it again.
We will go
right?
together.
But yeah,
Joyce,
wouldn't that be nice?
the first time that you can go over there, I take
Next year in
Next year.
Tehran. With that, we thank you. This is the conclusion of our
Thank you.
2023 season. So thank you guys. All right. Thank you.
So join our clubhouse.
Exactly.